Hey everybody, Professor Snart checking in again as we continue moving through our online class. So we are getting into Unit 3, which I'll talk about in a second here, but just a couple of, I suppose, more general comments before we get to that. So first of all, we'll look at our due dates here. You're probably already getting a sense of how quickly we move. So I know it's common sense, but you know that the 8-week class is half as long as that 16. So what would take, let's say, a week in the 16-week format takes us half as long. You know, you compress everything. So the due dates really do turn around, you know, quite quickly. We are just now, as I'm recording this, here on the Friday, January 29th. So we're wrapping up Unit 2, and then we'll move into Unit 3. You'll also notice that if you look as the due dates go, they're fairly regular on this sort of Tuesday-Friday scheme until we get to our first essay, which is down here, where we have a little bit more time. So one of the reasons that we move a little bit more quickly in some of the earlier units is that it gives us more time to work on those units that have the bigger assignments, the more point value, stuff that is just going to take you longer. So you also probably noticed that the units themselves, they don't involve yet us writing a big essay or doing any major projects. It's a lot of smaller things, whether it's just the introductions that we did before or the basic stuff from Unit 2, fairly short reading, a pretty basic discussion board, a very brief quiz, kind of little things. So the thing that I want you to notice here and think about is obviously not just the speed and so, of course, the time management piece, but that it's really not until halfway through, if not more, of our class that we write our first full-blown essay, which might seem a little strange given that it's like a composition class, but one of the things that I like to do is try to scaffold all of the things that we'll be looking for or looking to put into place in that essay in smaller activities as we go through each of the units. So think of it this way. If we haven't, if you took a history class, you know, history, American history from, I don't know, 1850 to present or whatever. Okay, so it's, you know, week 2 or week 3, you've covered from 1850 to, I don't know, 1875. You wouldn't then do a test on 1800 to present, right, the whole thing. So the same thing kind of goes for us. It doesn't make sense to write a whole essay up here in Unit 2 or 3 or really anywhere here until we've actually covered the various ideas or concepts that I'll be looking for you to like show me that you've understood in the essay here, right? So we want to cover them kind of in discrete parts before we put them all together. In other words, I don't want to assign an essay and then grade for things that we haven't even covered yet. So if you wonder why it comes so late or why we do these little kind of piecemeal things, it feels like you're just filling time or you're just doing this little thing, it's not really connected to anything else, that's why. It'll all come together when we actually get down to writing our first major essay. So the other way of thinking about that is that as we work through, like whether it's a 10-point quiz, kind of a just barely any points, or discussion board post, like especially for Unit 3, remember that the purpose of all that work, or the work that we do, is always to show me, just like in any other class, it's to show me that you've basically been to class, quote unquote. In other words, you've watched the videos that we have or read the material or, you know, whatever it might be, stuff that's in our course here. You've worked through that content and can now apply the ideas in a quiz or a writing or some sort of assessment situation. So it's always good to think of what we're doing as an individual activity, but that's connected or that's leading up to this much larger, more unified, more meaningful kind of activity, whether it's an essay or like our final essay, which is obviously where we're getting to by the end. I think for whatever reason, in English classes especially, people often tend to lose sight of like where we're headed. So they get a little bit mired in some of the individual things, and if those things get disconnected, you don't see the sort of purpose of them, then it just feels like you're doing them for the sake. It's like busy work, people call it, or it's just like unconnected to some larger goal. And so they forget that the purpose of all that stuff is, again, to show me that you're doing the course, right? You're getting the content and then can apply it in some sort of assessment situation, whether it's a quiz or a short paragraph or whatever it happens to be. So again, for whatever reason, in our context, that connection between what we cover and the things that you do and the assessment side is not always so strong. Whereas again, let's take our history course, for example. If you came to class every day and learned a bunch of facts about, when people were born, when they died, when important treaties were signed or wars were fought or whatever it might be, and then you come for the midterm and it just asks you those facts, there's a clear kind of connection between, okay, that midterm is designed to see, did you sit in class and do the readings and pay attention and et cetera, et cetera. There's a real close connection between the assessment side of things and you doing the work for the class, putting in the time. The same thing really goes for us, even if it doesn't totally appear that way on the surface. Everything that we do is kind of learning a concept or practicing a skill that I have to make sure that you've got. So when when you're writing your essay for paragraph, or for essay 3, when you're writing your paragraph for unit 3, again, you're not just sort of like writing it the way you want to or the way your high school teacher said, or like off in space and there's just no kind of guidelines. There's very, very specific guidelines for unit 3. And so that's what I'm looking for. Did you apply those guidelines? Did you use those concepts? And then of course that builds us as we keep going to the application in the larger context, the more holistic context of our first essay. So that kind of gives you a sense of like how our course is built in terms of this scaffolding, but also it helps to make the littler things we do kind of meaningful. So they don't just feel like we're biding our time until we can finally write our first essay. So having said all that then, Unit 3 is actually, I think, one of the most important units that we cover in terms of like one of the most fundamental concepts we have for our writing class. So sort of the writing content of what we're covering here. And it's the shape of a paragraph or shape of an essay idea. So I won't go through it here, right? It's all within the unit itself. There's a video version that walks you through it. There's a more sort of static version with, of course, text accompanying. There's, explanations. So there's basically the same fundamental idea presented a number of different ways. So hopefully it really sticks with you. And again, when it comes to writing like the essay or the paragraph assignment for this unit or our essay assignments, this is the concept stuff or part of the concept stuff that I'm looking for you to apply. You've got to show me that you get this and you can do it in an essay. So it's not like this is just a suggested way to do it or whatever. It's just like in that history class, you learn a certain date and that's the date. Dates that are wrong, right? So some people feel like oftentimes English is a bit of a mysterious subject, but for our purposes here, right, we're not doing creative writing. This isn't just sort of journaling. It's really not as maybe mysterious or as opaque as some people often experience it to be. In fact, one of my goals is to make it really clear to you what kinds of things we're learning and thus that I'm looking for in the essay so that you have a really clear sense of expectations. And that always makes it easier when you know what's expected of you, right? Okay, so back to the top of the unit here. So this is a good example of a unit where you have to be aware of the assignment piece coming down here in this third folder, but of course the material so you can do this successfully is before it. So you can't just skip to the assignment, right? You don't show up to class, but then midterm rolls around, so you show up and try to do well. It's probably not going to work. Okay, so you've got to work through the shape of the essay paragraph idea material. There's some introductory stuff on MLA citation and a quick quiz. This is hugely important for us as part of the English 1102, or what's sometimes called the research course. So clearly MLA citation. And then what we'll cover a little bit later is finding secondary sources, using them correctly, building a works cited page, all of that stuff. Again, we haven't covered that, so it's not like I would expect you to do it for these assignments yet. That would sort of have the cart before the horse, if you know what I mean. But we're starting to get to it, right? So it's important that you look at these examples, do the little quiz here, should be relatively straightforward. And then the assignment itself, which I'll click myself into. So again, not a full-blown essay, but our first slightly more formal writing assignment. Just a paragraph in length. We're not trying to develop a huge, kind of unwieldy thing here. And there's a lot of description, a lot of explanation for the assignment. In fact, your paragraph won't be anywhere near as long as the assignment for the paragraph. But it's really important that, again, I lay out kind of the expectations that what you're supposed to be learning here is this material. And so when you write your paragraph, that's your way of showing me that you looked at this, you looked at the other folder material, and can now apply it in a writing situation, right? So as always, if you have questions about kind of our course generally or specific pieces of the content that we're working through, by all means be in touch. And again, keep real track of those due dates so you're beginning to get a sense of how quickly we move from one date to the next. And hopefully you're being able to figure out sort of like your rhythm for our 8 weeks in the semester as far as times that you can work effectively, and maybe you're not doing all the work at once but parsing it out in a couple of different chunks. That usually works a little bit different for everybody, but it's important that you figure out what your rhythm for the semester is going to be. All right, I'll talk to everybody soon.